Hi, this is Anna from Style Campaign. I'll be talking about the basics of animation in email using Gifs and WebP. If you missed it, part 1 was cuts, and this is where you take a small number of frames and cut between with no transitions. Now, you can produce a wide range of effects fairly quickly. So that was part 1. Part 2 is video, and I'll be going over file size, placement, accessibility, making videos for email, and trends. So to see what's typical, I saved 100 animations from my inbox and sorted them into 3 groups. 54 out of 100 were cuts, 26 were video, and 20 were keyframe animations. So video and cuts made up the majority at 80%. Now these are some of the videos I received, and by video we're really referring to Gifs and WebP. Now while a couple had an HTML5 component, most weren't real video. So let's start with file size and look at frame count. Most of the videos were between 15 and 50 frames long, and you can see them highlighted in white. The lowest was Booking.com, which used just 8 frames. You can see it at the top there on the 3rd column. It came in just under the 1 megabyte limit that we discussed in part 1. It's 986K. Yelp uses only 12 frames, and it had the smallest file size at 451K. Now, I'll sometimes create these reduced frame rate animations, and this was originally 104 frames out of After Effects, whereas this version is just 12 frames after I rebuilt it in Photoshop. Now, though typically we want something that runs more smoothly, like this Han Kojopenhaven video. It's 25 frames long and 4.1 megabytes. Now, which is fairly typical, as most of the videos were between 3 and 5 megabytes in size, and they're bunched around the 3rd and 4th column in white. You can see here that there's not much happening below 3 megabytes, especially if we're wanting smooth video. Which is Slack's recommended file size limit for web animations. Now, in contrast to cuts, most of the videos stuck with 1x res. Only 7 out of 26 doubled up the resolution. You can load different resolution images based on criteria like browser width or via dynamic images if you want to go that extra step. A couple like Mulberry were using half res and then scaling it up, though even then this file was, I think it's 3.6 megabytes. Only 3 out of the 26 videos were under the 1 megabyte recommendation from part 1. And one thing that I'm seeing more of is multiple videos in one email. Paco Rabanne featured 3 to 5 videos in a number of sends this year. Zara, Nike, and F. Miller have also all sent 2 or more videos in an email. It's not that uncommon. This was from Compass's motion guidelines and may have a bit about email, whereby they mention using fewer frames, shorter duration, and fewer colours to try and keep below 1 megabyte. Now, there's really no secret to keeping file sizes down beyond what we already know. I think some people use an optimizer like EasyGif, and these are file names from a couple of video emails that I've received. Now, the only magic bullet that I know of is switching to WebP, which 5 out of the 100 brands did. One was Ted Baker and another was Zara. Loewe, Chanel and Dior have also all used WebP videos, so it's mainly fashion retailers. So WebP animations are around 64% smaller than GIFs with better image quality. And this is from Zimmerman, and the WebP file is more than twice the resolution of the GIF, and you can see it there on the left, and they're both at 100%. It also has more frames. It was 82 compared to 52, and yet it's still half the file size. So the WebP is 3.7 megabytes versus the 6.6 megabyte GIF. So the benefits are pretty clear. I think this is the biggest video in an email I've ever seen, and it was sent by Zara, and it's a WebP video, and it's 640 by 1216 pixels tall and 1x res. And I think it's 320 frames, and this sort of long tool format looks really good on mobile. And to top it off, they had a second video underneath. So brands are already using WebP to send bigger and longer videos. Email support for WebP is 88%, and that's if you're using dynamic images and probably via a vendor. If you're using the picture element, then it's Apple and Android clients. I also wanted to briefly mention the AVIF format, as brands like Mr. Porter, Saks, Chanel and Zara are already using it in email, and it supports animation where I've only ever seen it used with static images. Now, AVIF can be up to 10 times smaller than a JPEG, so it's not surprising that we're seeing it used for hero images like here with Chanel. And this AVIF image is 1400 by 1800 pixels, so 2 times res. Now, I installed this AVIF Photoshop plugin. You can see the link down there on the left in order to view and create still images. AVIF has 56% email support, and again you'd use it with the picture element or server side. Now, so just a quick final caveat when talking about file size is Gmail's 102K limit isn't something that you need to factor in, as it doesn't include external images, it's just the weight of your code. So the next thing I wanted to look at is placement. 10 out of the 26 videos weren't in the hero but were placed further down the email, and I'm seeing this sort of configuration a lot where you have a static product grid and one is video. It helps to draw the eye down the page and keeps the file size fairly small as it's not a large hero image. Now here's a few more examples from Frank and Oak, Lavin and Jimmy Choo. And the same pattern on the web, you've got multiple small videos that are interspersed, drawing you down the page. This is from a website, I think it's Maidson Margiela, and I really like how subtle and inviting the video is here, especially with the slow-mo. Now, there's a performance metric called largest contentful pane, and it measures the amount of time it takes for the largest visual element to render. And this graph from SpeedCurve shows a 50% drop in conversions if the LCP goes from 1 to 2 seconds. So we want our hero image to finish loading as quickly as possible. For this reason, it's sometimes recommended that you don't animate your LCP. I'm not saying never put video in the hero, just that it's worth testing some different approaches. This article talks about how people have become desensitized to header and hero content and just scroll right past. And I think it was Mark Robbins who shared this in the Email Geek Slack channel. Related to this email by neighbor doesn't have a traditional header. It's just straight to the content with a big logo in the footer. Now, I first noticed this kind of what I call a no-header trend on websites, and I've seen it creeping into email. And here's one from, is it Sportivo? And, over the years, we've moved our Navi and web version links into the footer, but I'm also seeing logos getting shifted. With email, you still have the from name right above for brand recognition, so it's not as radical as it seems. And here's an example on the web. It's by, is it Ballistria? Lazy loading would be really useful with animations that are placed further down the page, as it only loads assets when they're needed as you scroll near them. There's strong native browser support for lazy loading. I think it's around 93%. Can I Email puts support at 29%, and this was in 2021. But if we go by email client market share, it's more like 60%. Just make sure you don't lazy load your hero images, only assets that are further down. So there's a few WCAG success criteria specific to video, and you're probably familiar, but let's have a quick run through. Player controls are a level A requirement with auto-playing content that lasts more than 5 seconds. We can see it in action with this video marquee on the, is it RISD University website. You can see there's this pause motion button on the right there. Also on this sustainable design website, there's a switch to turn all the animations off. And another one on the Office of Ordinary Things, which is another climate and sustainably focused design studio. There's obviously kind of common ground between sustainable design and accessibility, and there's been a couple of talks by Alice Lee and Ted Gaius about eco-friendly emails, and I'll add the links in the write-up. So back to player controls, even if you're using real video like Monclera here, it's still going to show up as a GIF in Gmail. We have the same problem described by the BBC, which is partly why all the 100 animated GIFs I saved out looped continuously. The BBC recommend lazy loading as a solution, but as we just saw, support is only at 26% in email, so you get what we're dealing with. Though one thing that we can do is add a reduced motion query, which allows us to provide a static alternative for people who've opted out of motion. It has 46% support, but it's around 60% if we go by market share. So related to motion blur and camera shakes is the free flashes or below threshold. These all fall under motion sensitivity, which is discussed in this article by Val Head. Now, we covered type in part 1, and in this Paco Rabanne email the text is image-based, but it's nice and large. And here they've used live text with a video background. Guidelines around video and text show up in a number of motion guidelines, and this is from Uber and Noom and Unity have a motion grid, and that's in order to keep all their animations and type consistent. So for making, let's pick up where we left off. In part 1 we saved an animated GIF out of Photoshop by going File, Export, Save for Web, Legacy. And for WebP we installed the plugin WebP Shop and put the timing in the layer names. So for instance, frame 1 brackets 1000 milliseconds, frame 2 brackets 500 milliseconds. And this is fine for short animations, but for video you might have 50 layers. So for that you can use this script called Layer Renamer, which automatically names and numbers all your layers. You might need to reverse the order of your layers by going Layer Arrange Reverse. Though nowadays I do most of my video conversions using FFmpeg. It's a free open source command line tool, so if I'm in After Effects I'll save out an MP4 video and then use FFmpeg to convert it to either a GIF or a WebP. Many tools are powered by FFmpeg, such as EasyGIF, which I mentioned earlier, and I'll quickly show you how I make a WebP video from an MP4 file. So all I need to do is put the input and output file name in the script, and then I just double click it. And for GIF output, I think there's an image quantizer parameter which tells it to generate a custom color palette for every frame. So for instance, if we're using 256 colors. So my scripts are pretty vanilla. As well as converting between different formats, you can use them to scale, crop, trim, or adjust the frame rate or set the number of loops using various different parameters. So it saves you having to open Premiere for basic stuff. Now occasionally I've saved an MP4 out of Photoshop and then used FFmpeg to make the WebP rather than mess around with all the layer names. Now, if you just want a GIF out of After Effects, you can use the plugin GIF Gun, which costs $39. Alternatively, there's a Motion Tools GIF plugin, and it was released recently, and it does the same thing as GIF Gun, but it's free, and you just select your comp and then you press this big Make GIF button, and it automatically outputs 2 GIFs of different quality into a folder for you. Now lastly, this is from Compass's motion guidelines, and they have a section about creating GIFs for email, and what they do is render out a PNG sequence out of After Effects and then convert that to a GIF. I imagine that many of you are using vendors for video and email, but just in case, there's a number of ways that you can go about it. Now, as well as FFmpeg, there's also the WebP lib from Google. So here's a roundup of some of the tools I mentioned. There's also things like Time Lord, which helps to bridge Photoshop and After Effects, and Inspector Spacetime, which generates motion specs from your After Effects files. It goes without saying that if you have the skills and time, you might want to do some of this in code. I'm kind of putting CSS to one side because it's a whole other talk, and not because I don't think we should be using it. So one thing that I sometimes do is do a prototype in After Effects, and then I'll collaborate with a developer to try and rework it in code. And ideally it helps to have some kind of description of what you're trying to do. You might add the time in and the ease-ins into the specs, and Polaris have their ease-in tokens documented in their guidelines with this nice sort of plain English description, which you can see over there on the right. Vimo mentioned Ease and Wiz, which is an After Effects plugin with a bunch of ease-in presets. I think one benefit to using After Effects is there's a lot of tutorials and resources around it, which creates this sort of shared understanding. I have this plugin myself and also use Expo, so it just kind of helps. Video content is often incorporated with motion graphics, like you can see with Hulu here. So things like easing and transitions are all part of it. So transitions do show up in a number of the motion guidelines that I looked at. And as email designers, we often inherit ready-made video assets, but I think that some light video prep isn't that unusual. And these are Slack's transitions from their guidelines. So these are some motion guidelines with a bit more of a focus on video. So a few projects have caught my eye that take motion tooling a step further. And the first is by Square, who built their own web-based motion tool called Otto. And this is so that anyone can make on-brand animations. So you'd still start with your shot list and then you build an editor around it. And I'll scroll down this article so that you can see it better. It mentions how they can modify and extend the tool, and I guess by adding in new animations. Another project that I really liked was this animation toolkit made by DIA for Pinterest. Mitch Bahone referred to it as a generative edit tool housed within After Effects. And let me just show you some of it. Then there's this generative branding tool for the Tokyo Dome made by Antform. There's obviously some crossover with generative art here, which you can see more clearly with this other DIA project. And this was for a technology startup. It's SML XL. So I suppose the progression is to make ad hoc animations and then manually make a toolkit, which is kind of where I'm at, and then make some custom tooling to more easily generate animations, often with some kind of generative or modular mix and match element, like what we've been doing with modular email systems, but for motion. There's also a lot of interest in tooling in the short-form video space, such as CapCut, Jitter, and Revo. This is a tutorial showing how to do a velocity edit using a few different apps. I like to follow some of the motion trends that show up on social media for my own work. I'm not saying that we should all start making velocity edits, but for instance, these were professionally produced by motion designer Chrissy Abbott for Adidas. They look kind of lo-fi, almost like a zine in animation form. It had that whole kind of 90s digital art thing. A number of the videos I received had that kind of same almost unpolished feel, as if they were shot on someone's phone. And this is by the fashion retailer Feng Chang Wang. And also the Mulberry video that we looked at earlier, it has a kind of retro VHS quality to it. And you can tell they've used a filter of some kind. Now, if we compare it to Maidson Margiela's videos, which look slick and professionally made. Now, this article talks about how restaurants have adapted their menus to try and be more viral, and how TikTok requires moments of motion and activation because of video. So, close-ups of stretchy cheese and dripping sauce. So social media can be a source of inspiration for both tooling and visual trends. But I also collect a lot of bread and butter stuff as reference material. Like I have a whole bunch of different sliders, and here there's a whole bunch of video grids. Stocky's motion guidelines have a bunch of versatile animations, and the reason I collect all this is I need to come up with a list of shots, similar to how we come up with a list of module patterns. So I've been kind of getting a little bit more organized in order to have a lot of ideas on hand. One new short-form video editor is Ozone, and I haven't actually used it yet because there's a wait list, but like a number of tools these days, it has an AI component. It looks like we might be getting some AI tools built into Premiere. Now, this was a job posting for an AI prompt animator on Danny Glover's production website just earlier this year, and it reads someone active in the AI animation space and would be a project leader of sorts. I'm kind of cautiously interested in whether AI can help us create animations, and I think though a lot of the AI video that I've seen still looks kind of balked, and I think there's also ethical issues to consider, for instance, taking a model's likeness and creating new content from it. And lastly, there's tooling around AR and spatial commerce like Apple's Object Capture and Luma AI. And these both allow you to create 3D models on your phone, which you can then make videos or animations out of. which might be useful, as the Shopify team said 3D models convert more readily. They said a 94% lift over video or imagery. So I'm interested in getting more 3D models into email, even just via animations, or possibly linking to AR content from an email. Now that Apple has their headset out, I think it's worth revisiting AR and email. So these are a bunch of AI video and 3D tools, but I'm sure many of you have already had a play. So here's a quick rundown of what we just looked at for part 2 video. And for the final part, I'll be going over keyframe animation, which made up 20 out of the 100 animations. And as you'll see, it's mostly light keyframe animation at a level that most of us can handle, or at least get up to speed with. So thanks again for joining me.